Mrs. Russell's boy. Don't do anything you'll regret, son. Why don't you put the gun down and we can talk all about it?
Go ahead and talk.
The Devil All the Time is a psychological thriller film released by Netflix on September 16th, 2020. Based on the Donald Ray Pollock novel of the same name, the film was written by Paulo Campos and Antonio Campos, who would also direct the film. The film stars Tom Holland, Bill Skarsgård, Robert Pattinson, Sebastian Stan, and Riley Keough. The Devil All the Time was a movie that certainly turned a few heads when its trailer released. A dramatic story following many lives over the course of years, a star-studded cast flexing the strength of their acting muscles, all while being hosted by the comfort of your own home theater, is surely enough to get anyone's seal of approval. But given the sheer quantity of choice afforded by your red-letter media, you gotta wonder what this one will do to separate itself from the rest. What all is waiting for those who click play? In this review, we break down the life experiences of an era gone by and determine what the future will be for this tale through time. Just as a warning to everyone here, there will be major spoilers ahead. If you wish to see this movie for yourself without knowing anything beforehand, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The story begins with Willard Russell following his experiences starting a new life for himself after returning home from World War II. Following the horrors he witnessed fighting in the Pacific, Willard meets a waitress named Charlotte when he stops in Meade, Ohio on his way back home to Coal Creek, West Virginia. The two fall in love, eventually buying a house of their own and having a son, Arvin. Though Willard's mother has tried to set up Willard with a girl named Helen, Helen finds love with a passionate yet unhinged pastor named Roy, and together they have a daughter named Lenora. In the years that follow, Roy becomes more and more unstable, until one day he takes Helen into the forest, killing her and falsely believing she will resurrect. Distraught, Roy ends up fleeing the state, where he is picked up by a couple, Carl and Sandy, who murder Roy after he refuses to participate in a steamy photo shoot. Charlotte dies from cancer, and Willard, after spiraling into a desperate state of depression, ends up taking his own life. Arvin and Lenora, now orphans, are taken in by Willard's mother. Arvin and Lenora maintain a very close bond as they grow up. Arvin watches over Lenora, standing up to boys who try to have their way with her, and Lenora keeps Arvin grounded in his more heated moments. One day, a new pastor by the name of Preston Teagarden arrives in town, and though Arvin takes an instant disliking to him after he humiliates his grandmother in front of a sermon of townsfolk, he becomes close to Lenora. Since Lenora often visits her mother's grave at the church, Preston acts as a voice of counsel for her, working his way into her head until eventually he has his way with her, which leads to her becoming pregnant with an unwanted baby. Panicked and humiliated by what has happened to her, Lenora falls into a deep depression, and though she has a brief moment of hope that she can continue on, she accidentally takes her own life. In the autopsy that follows, Arvin is informed that Lenora had been pregnant when she died. Immediately suspecting Preston, Arvin goes to the church with a pistol that once belonged to his father, and after a brief and heated exchange, Arvin shoots Preston dead. Arvin then flees the church, knowing he must leave the state to avoid the police. While on the run, he is picked up by Carl and Sandy, the same couple that murdered Lenora's father Roy many years ago. Before the couple can extort Arvin into doing one of their murderous photo shoots, Arvin shoots the couple dead. Arvin flees the scene, making his way to his childhood home in Knockemstiff. While visiting the site of his father's death and burying the bones of his dog that his father had tried to sacrifice to save Charlotte, Arvin is tracked by Sheriff Lee Bodecker, the same sheriff who responded to the death of Willard many years ago. Despite this connection, it was also the case that Sandy was Lee's sister, and that Arvin had just killed her. After a game of cat and mouse through the woods, Arvin and Lee come face to face, and Arvin shoots Lee in self-defense. As Lee lays dying, Arvin shows Lee a picture of what she and Carl had done to Roy, allowing Lee to find closure as he slips away. In the final moments of the movie, Arvin is picked up by a hippie van on their way to Cincinnati. Arvin contemplates what he will do next. Will he find a girl and settle down? Will he one day return to his family, provided the law learned he'd done right by people? Will he enlist in the army and fight in a war the same way his father had? Though the thoughts raced through his head, the only thing he could do for now was get some sleep as he kept heading forward. Without a doubt, this is a movie that fully commits itself to building the picture of how big and small the world is, and just how connected we all are without even knowing it. There's no denying that it's absolutely fascinating how broad yet in-depth this story is, and it's an enjoyable idea to watch unfold. But that doesn't unfortunately stop this movie from getting in its own way. The broad setting of this movie was very well realized, and it does a good job of bringing you into this tale through time story. Details such as the vehicles of the period, the music playing on the radio, and little interactions about finding work or the price of meat really develop the setting in a grounded and relatable way, making it easy to latch on to what's going on in this world. Larger details of the setting, such as the ramshackle buildings of towns laying off the beaten path, the main streets of brick-and-mortar buildings that barely crest beyond the height of surrounding trees, the secluded forests and lakes laying just beyond every road, and the weathered wooden houses and churches play a great part in establishing how, despite the changes that come over 20 years, things still feel oddly the same. In one way or another, the rural people of this story are essentially forgotten by the bigger world, and in one way or another, the struggles they have to get by and do what they believe is best resonates in a quiet and unassuming way. The style of the more visual moments of the movie are captivating in a way that makes you scrunch your nose in disgust. Scenes such as Sheriff Bodecker examining the photo negatives of Carl and Sandy's murder victims, Preston taste-testing the chicken livers made by Arvin's grandmother, and the scene where Willard strings up Arvin's dead dog on a cross are all scenes that demand the full attention of the bile trying to make its way up through your throat. These little moments set a tone of moral darkness that permeates the movie, and helps you to realize that despite the repeated efforts of these folks to find God, the devil is the only one waiting for them. Acting is the clear winner in things that carry this movie, allowing the lonely, dark, and twisted setting established by the isolation of the backcountry to truly come alive. Tom Holland brings the audience into this story, essentially acting as the moral compass of the movie. As the emotionally troubled young loner trying to make sense of a world everyone else around him seems blind to, he gives you someone to root for against a backdrop of delusion or indifference with the dark ways that have taken hold of people's lives. Robert Pattinson comes in on the opposite end of the moral spectrum, embodying the twisted mind of an arrogant and self-absorbed man set on making the town around him his for the taking. His manipulative methods of taking advantage of the pious and naive people around him make him easy to hate, and with his vile acts towards Lenora, being like a sister to Arvin, he provides stakes for this movie to shoot towards. Every other actor, whether it be the earnest and honest folks such as Lenora, Charlotte, or Arvin's grandmother, or the troubled and delusional minds belonging to Willard, Roy, Lee, or the murderous Carl and Sandy, brings a layer of emotional depth to the roles in how they interact with the world around them, and how more often than not, they let it get the better of them. While the setting, acting, and style of this movie have the power to draw you in and make its events interesting to witness, the story and progression, as interesting as they are on paper, end up being the movie's weak link. It seems like with the number of characters with relatively loaded stories to present, they should have either cut out half of the characters and used the found time to pad the more important characters' stories, or turn the story into a mini-series or TV show, or something with a little more breathing room. The movie bites off way more than it can chew, trying to share the life story of every single person you see, which ironically makes it hard to care about almost any of them. While certain marketing aspects for this movie would have you believe that Tom Holland and Robert Pattinson's dichotomy is the star of the show, which it is if you want to be fair, we spend over 45 minutes at the start of the movie fleshing out an origin story for not only Arvin, but for his mother, father, and every on-screen member of his extended family in what should have essentially been a 15-minute prologue at most. This fact is only aggravated by the presence of flashbacks taking place in Arvin's later life, showing us things we have, quite literally, already seen. This disjointedness permeates other parts of the movie, with subplots like Sheriff Bodeker's hopes to run for election despite having dirty dealings, Carl and Sandy's story about picking up, photographing, and murdering hitchhikers, and the origin story for Lenora's parents taking time away from other more interesting subplots as a means of trying to fit together the pieces to the idea that everyone is connected in one way or another. While a lot of the characters do end up intersecting with one another, it feels empty because most of the characters wind up dead, with the crossing of their paths having little to no payoff to speak of by the time Arvin rolls off into the hippie haze sunset. Relating to the problems of the story and how it fails to build momentum, there's the issue of the narrator. The events and side story of this movie have a narrator to guide the audience through what's going on, while simultaneously giving them a look into each character's headspace. Apparently the person who authored the novel this movie is based on stepped in to narrate, which is actually quite interesting and charming. There are parts of this movie that also reflect that charm, mainly where the narrator walks you through some of the little things people get up to in the quiet moments of the movie. But the fact there's a narrator at all when the movie is as overloaded as it is, means you end up having the movie literally talk at you, taking away what little suspense the movie might have had. This is a case where one or the other but not both should have been applied. Either have a narrator fill in the gaps of the story we don't see or understand, or have all the stories on camera without any verbal explanation over top of it. While this wouldn't have solved all of the storytelling problems in this movie, it would have gone a long way in giving it back some of its allure and intensity. Because of the aforementioned issues with the story, the pacing is pretty stop and go, with the overabundance of things to do and say leading to most scenes being a minute or two long at most in an attempt to keep things moving. This does get better later in the movie, with scenes like Arvin's confrontation with Preston and Arvin's trip back to his childhood home having a much better flow that really helps sucker you back into what's happening. But if you have to go to the bathroom or refill your drink anytime during the first half of the movie, you'll have no choice but to either be confused as to what the hell's happening, or to give yourself carpal tunnel syndrome on the rewind path. So no matter what happens, make sure you have a full drink and a strong bladder. Other tips and life hacks can be provided as needed. The final rating for this cow country road trip is 7 out of 10. Though the movie delivers a strong setting and memorable acting that are worth watching in their own right, it can't quite figure out what it's trying to say through an overabundance of people and events to keep track of. Though an interesting attempt to explore just how big and small the world and the lives in it can be, it never quite reaches its full potential, leaving you wishing you had more time to figure out what it was trying to say. This should, however, whet the appetites of Tom Holland fans until they get around to releasing that movie. 5 years to get it on screen? I'm sure it's aged like fine wine. That will be all for today. Thanks for stopping by. If at any point you experienced an episode of enjoyment or clarity, then consider sticking around. Like, subscribe, or share if you wish, and if you have any suggestions for things you want to see reviewed, be sure to drop them down in the comments. There's plenty more to come, so if you end up coming back for more, well, then I'll see you when I see you.